What's up, guys? Welcome to Shero Radio. I'm your girl Zoe, and in the studio with me today is none other than my hero husband, Russell.
Hey guys.
So for those of you who are following us, you would know this is our first ever episode. We're so excited and we really hope you guys like it. So let's just jump right into it.
Let's do it. So why don't you explain to everyone how you came up with the idea for Shero Radio?
Sure. So I was in the broadcasting industry for 10 plus years and it was a really great experience. I learned a lot, but a few things stood out to me. Number one being the huge lack of diversity.
Okay.
And the second one being that there were no female anchors.
They are definitely not enough.
Right? And you know me, like I am such an expressive person. I'm very opinionated. So I really struggled to thrive in that environment, and I really wanted to take the lead and I couldn't. So I started Shero Radio to really take control back of my own path, and hopefully in doing so I can inspire others to do the same.
Absolutely. So what can the listeners expect from the podcast?
Well, Shero Radio is heavily self-help based, so lots of tips and tricks on how to navigate difficult times in life, and also a lot of fun interviews and positive news. In my background as an entertainment reporter, I learned very quickly that I really enjoy lifting others up. So you can look forward to that. And I, of course, could not do a podcast without my guilty pleasures of reality TV and crime.
That is amazing. I am full Bachelor Nation here.
Since it's been married, for sure.
I noticed that you touched on self-help. What makes you so passionate about it?
Well, it's really personal to me. I have had a long history of anxiety and depression. I have been in therapy proudly for 7 years. And, you know, I really felt like growing up in Australia that I struggled to look for role models in the self-help field. And mental health is unfortunately not as forward as other places in Australia. So I remember being 16 years old and I came across a clip of Queen Oprah.
Love Oprah.
Everyone loves Oprah. I'm not the only person, but she truly was the first person I looked up to and who helped me. And, you know, it was just like a 2-minute YouTube clip on Super Soul Sunday, and she was talking about having whispers. And for those who don't know what whispers are, it's basically your inner voice guiding you. So whether you believe in God or the universe or any sort of religion or belief that you have, we all have kind of this voice like telling us right from wrong. Like many people see it as your conscience as well. And I really just kind of became self-aware in that moment and learned that, you know, I have the answer to everything and I can really help myself and like become my own hero. And, you know, as soon as I learned that, I kind of wanted everyone else to know it. So that's why I'm so passionate about self-help. I don't really see it as giving advice or anything like that. I really see it as kind of opening a raw, authentic dialogue so that we can all relate and learn together.
Absolutely. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of great information there.
Yeah. I feel like we need to talk about the current state of the world, coronavirus. Am I right?
Quarantine 2020.
The struggle is real, and I know that people are still struggling out there.
Absolutely.
And I think we all went through a lot of different stages, and we're still going through a lot of different stages, from, you know, shock to fear to confusion to disbelief to even numbness.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that that's totally fine wherever you're at in the midst of those stages. I know for us as a couple, I think the biggest thing that we've personally struggled with is routine.
Yeah, routine's definitely been the biggest for us, starting from my early morning Zoom calls in our loft space.
Yeah, both of us are working from home at the moment, and you know, it's been a challenge.
Yep.
I had to find a co-working space so that you could stay home and we could have just that little bit of space. And I think it worked straight away. We were lucky to find that solution. And for me personally, I think what I've struggled with is I had a family member book flights to the US this year. I had to cancel that flight, and honestly, I don't know when I'm going to see my family again.
Right. It's tough. It's really tough.
It's super tough, and I know I'm not the only person in that predicament.
No, absolutely not. I think there's, half or more of the country are struggling with that right now, not being able to see family, not being able to see friends. I know personally for me, I'm a new uncle, Zoe is a new aunt, but not being able to spend those moments for a new birth. I know that it's not just us, but there's a lot of people that have gone through similar events. Yeah,
and you've struggled, I think, with not going into work and being around people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, when you're a people person and you're running a team, Zoom calls are great, but not being able to really sort of, being a meeting and getting together and collaborating has been really tough for us. But we've, you manage the best you can.
Yeah, but compared to what we went through earlier this year,
this is nothing.
Yeah, these are first world problems. Russell and I haven't really talked about our personal experience with coronavirus, and we really wanted to share that with y'all today. We moved from New York earlier this year to Nashville. Russell got a great new job right before coronavirus hit, and we accepted the offer not knowing what 2020 would look like. And we haven't really shared it with a lot of people in our lives, just a few close friends and family, because honestly, what we went through was really terrifying.
Yeah, it was one of the scarier things I think that we've gone through as a couple, for sure.
Yeah, and what I'm talking about is we both had our own experiences with coronavirus. For me, I actually traveled to Denver for my birthday to see Oprah live in early March, and at the time, it wasn't required to wear masks or quarantine, and we stayed up to date on the news every day, wondering if I should fly out of New York or not. And there were no CDC requirements to stay home, and I went along excited, and it hit me on the way back. I started seeing the news, and I was in the airport early, of course.
She's always in the airport early. She, for most of us, it's, get to the airport 2 hours before for an international flight. She gets 4 hours before for a domestic flight.
I'm sure there are control freaks out there like me. I like to casually make my way to the gate. I'm like you who sprints.
I am a little bit more of a risk taker, I would say, trying to squeeze out as much of that airport bar as I possibly can.
Yeah, definitely. And I got there early, and I spent a lot of hours at the airport, and I really started to notice people who were sick. They were coughing and sneezing, and I didn't know if they actually had coronavirus, but it wasn't a great feeling.
No.
And then I flew home, and everything was fine.
Yep.
At that point, Trump had closed the country to any outside travelers.
Yep, he had.
Russell had started quarantining as some people at his workplace were exposed. And we were home together, and about 2 days later, I woke up with a sore throat.
Yeah, you were in some of the roughest shape I've seen you in my life.
Yeah, and I never get sick.
Yeah.
Like, I have bad sinuses, but this sore throat was just different. It was like I had a cheese grater throat. Like, it was so painful, and I was already losing my voice, and I didn't want to think the worst and be paranoid, so we kind of just kept it to ourselves.
Yep.
And then, unfortunately, it did get worse. My fever went up to, what would you say, like 103?
I think it got to 104.1.
Yeah, and I had the chills. My chest was incredibly sore. I had shortness of breath.
No, that was probably the scariest of all the symptoms.
Yeah, and so after about 3 or 4 days, we decided to go into our urgent care.
Yep.
And, as everyone would know who has gone in to be tested for coronavirus, the doctor comes in almost like a hazmat suit, which is pretty intimidating.
Full yellow hazmat suit, and all the doctors and nurses also had the face shields.
Yes, and they did a test for the flu and I think for strep throat.
Yep.
And none of those were positive.
None until they looked or tried to look closer into if they could find a line to somehow tell you it was.
Yeah, so what Russell's saying is that they wanted to find a line, so the doctor went outside and asked another doctor, hey, do you see this line? And we heard the other doctor say no.
Yep.
So that was not very comforting, and I asked him, hey, like, do you think I have coronavirus? And he said, is likely that you do. And I think that at the time it was incredibly frustrating because we couldn't get a test.
No, that was almost impossible at that time, in the very beginning of sort of where New York as a city was in their testing, which was
very disappointing.
Not great.
Yet celebrities were somehow getting tests all over the US. But that's a whole nother topic. The US's healthcare system. But yeah, we at that point went home and tried to get better. Unfortunately, I did not get better straight away. I actually got a lot worse. We were really concerned at that point. We told close friends and family what was going on. We monitored me really closely. I hit a breaking point one morning. I remember waking up and the pain was so intense in my throat and in my chest that I couldn't speak. I completely lost my voice at that point, and I had to like write down on my phone what to say to you, and I was just so frustrated that I wasn't getting better. So I started crying, and I think we were both just like kind of at a loss.
What do we do now? Right? What are the next steps to get you feeling better?
And you know, fortunately, in a few days after that, I feel like I turned a corner. I didn't get completely better because for the next like 3 to even 6 weeks, my chest was still sore. And you know, you have a lot of congestion still, but I mean, the temperature and the chills and all the other little things kind of subsided, and we were like, thank God, you know, that we got through that, and we, you know, hopefully it doesn't come back, and or we catch another strand. And then our story took another twist and turn. You woke up with a sore throat.
Almost the exact same symptoms that you had, and the feeling was awful. It was probably the worst sore throat I've probably ever had in my life.
Right, and I think you described it as like the flu times 100, which I agree is like the best description. And you know, you had it longer. Like it was like over 2 weeks, and you were still dealing with it. Yeah,
it was a feeling that you just know you're not right. You know that it's not the flu. You know that there's additional symptoms that you just aren't used to. So it was about a 2-week span, but it was some of the worst 2 weeks of my life.
Yeah, and we were quarantining at the time, social distancing, and we couldn't go outside for walks or anything like that. So we had a rooftop, which no one ever walked on in Brooklyn. It was quite large, and we were lucky to have it.
Right.
So we would walk on our rooftop, and I remember when I was sick, I got out of breath really quickly walking, so we would take a break and I would get over that really quickly. But for you, unfortunately, when you got out of breath on that walk as well, you actually were out of breath for a few hours. It was, I just couldn't catch my breath. It was, again, I've never had this happen to me before, but you just can't catch your breath. And I think that was the scariest part about it, where I couldn't catch it up. It was shortness of breath. It was the whole thing. So it was really scary. And listen, Russell is like the least dramatic person when he's sick.
I try to be.
Like he never complains. He has such a high pain tolerance. But when we were back in our apartment, he looked at me and just asked me, "Can you drive me to the ER?"
Yep. It was a scary moment where you just know you're not right. You can't breathe properly, and those are the times you really need to take seriously.
Yeah, it's better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely.
And we had called.
Yep.
It was like a helpline in New York.
Yeah, it was the New York City Health Department coronavirus line where we were supposed to call if we had symptoms about getting a test.
Because there still weren't tests available.
Right. We couldn't get, but even with the online call, we couldn't get a doctor. They said, we'll call you back. 12, 24 hours later, still nothing. So we made a decision where we needed to go see somebody in person.
Yes, and that's a really hard decision to make because of how rapidly the cases were spreading and infecting in New York. Like in Brooklyn, where we lived, we were a few streets away from the hospital where there were body bags being put out. So it was so important at that time to stay home. So we wouldn't have left the apartment unless we were worried.
Right.
And we drove in New York in peak hour traffic to the hospital. It was one of the most stressful experiences I've ever been through.
Yeah.
I was trying to stay positive for you.
Yeah.
And we double parked, we went into the emergency room, and honestly, I really wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy what we saw when we got there.
No, definitely not.
There were middle-aged men, being brought in on stretchers that were struggling to breathe. Their wives, partners were crying. They were obviously kicked out straight away, as was I.
Yep.
And I went and waited in the car, and Russell was able to at least text me what was going on.
Yep.
But it was pretty much the slowest couple of hours I've ever waited for you on.
Yeah. And it really is tough to not have your spouse with you in an ER and most importantly a coronavirus setting. So once the doctor came through, she started performing a few tests on me. The most important one was the oxygen test, which tests obviously my oxygen levels in my lungs. And they hook you up to a device, walk you around the room, and then wait. So I waited for about 20-30 minutes on those results, and she came back from behind the ER doors and said, to my surprise, "You've definitely got it." And I asked...
And that was like, I remember when you text me that.
Right.
And I remember what I was doing. I was like in the car, texting your parents.
Yeah.
And I was like so confused. I was like, how did you get a test so quickly?
Right, and the funny part is I didn't actually get the coronavirus test, but this was a time where testing wasn't readily available, and the amount of patients that she saw that day, she said, you definitely have it based off of your oxygen levels and your symptoms.
Yeah, and this is like a professional ER doctor.
Yep.
That was the head of the whole department who had seen hundreds, if not thousands, of people come through with coronavirus.
Yep.
So you don't really question.
Absolutely not.
At all.
No.
You just accept it.
Yep.
But I think my first reaction when you text me when I was sitting in the car was actually, if I'm being honest, guilt.
Wow.
I realized in that moment that I clearly had it. Which was really, shocking, even though I predicted that I did. It was new information to hear it from a professional. But really, I was like, wow, I gave this to you.
Right.
And I know, it wasn't my fault at that time. We didn't have enough information with traveling.
Yep.
But I felt really guilty because you were affected and I love you, and it was just so hard to see you go through that.
Yeah.
And I remember just texting your parents, and they were really supportive, and the few people that we told were really helpful, because it wasn't like we just left the hospital and everything was fine.
Right.
We were on watch if you got short breath again, and we, fortunately you did get better in a similar way to me, where it wasn't 100% better, but most of the symptoms subsided.
Yep.
And we made the move from New York to Nashville. And, I was actually really relieved to get out of the epicenter of coronavirus in the US. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, that's me too.
Yeah.
Me too, all the way.
I feel like it was almost meant to be.
You have those times in your life
Yeah.
where it's if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. For us, it was definitely Nashville.
Yeah, and when we got here, this is really interesting because here we are coming from such a serious infected rate of coronavirus in New York, and then we get to Nashville and no one's wearing masks.
No, it's like it didn't even exist. It's like it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
If it's not in my area at the extent that it was New York, then it's not a big thing.
Yeah, and I think it was because, again, the rates weren't as high.
No.
However, that has changed.
It has. Phase 2.
Tennessee has become one of the most highest infected places, and we kind of assumed that would happen because people weren't taking it seriously.
No, nobody was.
And look, like when we first moved here, we didn't really talk to anyone. We kept to ourselves, but because everyone was social distancing correctly and respectfully, we did start to live our lives again. Like we started, wearing our masks, going out to restaurants at 50% capacity, then 75% capacity. We were in stage 3. Was it a week ago or 2 weeks ago?
A few weeks ago.
Yeah, and then the rates went back up, and after 4th of July weekend. And of course, we were pushed back into phase 2, which means that we are now back at 50% capacity.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's as you can tell, I'm confused. I think we're all confused.
There's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot to go through. But we went away for 4th of July weekend. We went away with all of our neighbors who work from home, who don't see anyone. So we essentially quarantined together.
Yep.
We went to a great Airbnb that was very isolated, about 40 minutes away. So we feel like we've been doing everything correctly. However, people are unfortunately still passing away and getting very sick because not everyone has the same viewpoints as the majority that would like to keep safe.
And the CDC, which is now basically requiring masks if we want to make sure that this pandemic gets taken down.
But overall, we feel just so blessed and lucky to have survived this. Like, we know that we're young, we know that we're healthy, but we didn't know if it would get worse or not during that time. So we know that a lot of people have not gone through the same positive experience, and our heart goes out to them and their loved ones.
Yep, it does.
So I think that it was a massive growing experience for us to not take anything for granted, and we're just always in contact with all of our loved ones, but we had some time to kind of think about like some tips for everyone still obviously going through quarantine together.
Yep.
Right? We kind of have thought if we could give out 5 points on how to survive coronavirus as well as quarantine, like what would we tell people? And I think we came up with our first point was the obvious, right?
Yeah.
Wear a mask.
Absolutely. Wear a mask and then wear another mask on top of that mask.
Right. I think what a mask represents for me is respect. Not just for your loved ones, but for a complete stranger.
Yep, absolutely.
Because you don't know other people's underlying health conditions or even their age.
Yep, and with coronavirus having some people being asymptomatic, you don't know when or if you're going to get it, so wearing a mask is the number one thing to make sure that we can beat this.
Especially going back into stage 2 for us. Wearing a mask in our building, in hallways, in the parking garage, in the gym. We don't really go to the gym, but
that's that 6 feet of separation right there.
I'm not too comfortable going there yet. I wear it in my co-working space.
Yep.
Obviously, when you sit down and you're 6 feet away, you can take it off.
Right.
However, just keep wearing that mask, and if you're unsure, just wear it.
Yep.
In
just
any
wear it.
environment.
Yep, that's great advice.
I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
Totally is. Another one that is on our top 5 list would be to, if you're not feeling well, stay inside.
Yeah.
I think that's also pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, we cannot stress this enough, having our own experience with coronavirus. I don't think it's a time to kind of like point fingers or shame anyone, but we know how quickly this spreads.
Yep, and as hard as quarantine can be, the reason it was implemented in the first place is so that we could beat this, is so that we could not continue to spread it. So there are some positives.
Flattening the curve is so important, and whether you're going for a smart socially distanced walk is okay.
Yep.
If you're spending time with friends that you know aren't exposed to people daily, that is okay.
Yep.
If you are seeing your family, knowing that you've both quarantined, like for us, like our family live in different states in the US, so we wouldn't just drive down there, we would probably quarantine first. It's really obvious stuff.
Yep, absolutely.
And on that note, when I'm speaking about loved ones, I think this is number 3 for me, is reach out to your loved ones.
Definitely.
I think that it sounds cliche, but it's really underestimated to give your family, friends, support group, whoever's in it, a call. I don't think you can bother people enough right now.
No.
Because what I'm seeing is that mental health is huge right now. During quarantine, a lot of people are experiencing it for the first time, being isolated in their homes.
It's tough.
Russell and I obviously are together. We get along great and talk a lot, but I know that there are a lot of people out there who don't have a roommate, a partner, a friend, family member living with them. And my heart goes out to you, and I really commend you for going through quarantine. We have lots of friends and family who are in that position, and it is not easy.
You really can't reach out to family and friends enough at this time.
Yeah. And I think the thing that stands out for me with reaching out to family and friends is to try and be vulnerable. Because it's easier said than done, I know that, but I think that that's really where the healing kind of starts with mental health, is getting vulnerable, taking that risk to really open up about what you're going through, and don't be afraid for your loved ones to help you, to lean on them. Yep,
absolutely. I really couldn't agree more. And that brings us into our number 4 tip, is really taking care of your mental health.
Yeah, and I think that I can really relate to this one, having struggled with mental health issues in the past. I really can't recommend going to therapy more. There's a lot of things you can do other than therapy, but I think that if it gets to a point where, a bad day kind of turns into a bad week, turns into a bad month, and you're not really making any progress, you're kind of stuck, I think that therapy is the next step. But there's so many other things you can do for your mental health: meditating, journaling, really just getting in touch with yourself and self-reflecting, and really digging deep to find what triggers you. Maybe even, look at quarantine as this time to really get mentally balanced,
That's a great call, really.
The last point, number 5, is finding a new normal.
That's a great one.
And this one excites me, honestly. And
I can tell it does.
Because I know there's not a lot to be excited about in 2020, and I know that everyone's plans have kind of gone out the window.
It's been a tough one.
Yeah, but for me, I love self-help. I'm always looking to learn from something, and for me especially, going through this year, I found that finding a new normal for myself, not wishing that I could go backwards, and not hoping that I can, sprint into the future, has been really peaceful. Really just finding a new normal, because we can't control what is happening.
No.
We have no sense of control, and that is, a helpless feeling.
It is.
But the positive of being out of control is realizing that you can always take your control back.
That's great.
And, you know, this is a time where the universe has literally stopped for you to pause, reflect, and center yourself.
Okay.
Maybe you are changing career.
Okay.
Maybe you're reevaluating a friendship or a relationship. You know, those to-do lists that we always think about when we're in 9-to-5 jobs that we never get around to.
I know those.
I'm not just talking about like reorganizing your closet. Like, I mean like the really deep stuff. Like maybe you want to go through all of your photos and like remember like memories that you haven't stopped to look at.
Yep.
Like there are so many things that you can do in quarantine. Fun projects as well, but really using, you know, the new normal as kind of like self-help for yourself.
Yep.
Because we may not get this time again.
We may not get the time, and I think you're totally right about that. We don't even know, you know, for example, if I'm going to be going back into the office.
Right.
So is this the new normal? And if this is the new normal,
like cherishing,
what does that mean for me?
even cherishing time with your loved ones
Right.
is a massive plus during this time.
Yep.
But yeah, just, you know, realizing that you can't go backwards, you cannot go forward. So really just like find a way to be peaceful in this difficult time. Something else as a human race that we've all experienced in 2020 is the Black Lives Matter movement. And this isn't something that's just popped up. This has been going on for quite a while.
Right. It's just really ramped up this year. And I think the world has really changed since the tragic death of George Floyd.
Absolutely.
And I don't think a lot of people know this about you, but you've been in human rights for quite some time. You know, ever since you were 16, you know, when you were volunteering in South Africa, in your mom's home country. So why do you think people are in so much pain?
I think being a woman of colour, growing up in Australia, experiencing racial discrimination and slurs myself, I think it's really simple.
Yeah.
I think people are fed up.
Yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
they don't feel seen and they don't feel heard. And it's been a really long time and things are still happening like this. And look, we saw South Africa, you know, end the apartheid, for God's sakes, you know, with such an amazing leader like Nelson Mandela that stopped oppression. And look, they still have a little bit to go with equality there. But what I'm seeing in the US is that African Americans are still not being treated correctly.
No.
And victims like Breonna Taylor have still not received justice, which absolutely blows my mind. And I think it really just comes down to leadership. To go from such an amazing government that actually implemented change like Barack Obama to what we have now, I think it's incredibly discouraging, and I think we've become desensitized.
Yep, and I think this is why it's so important that these types of things like the Black Lives Matter movement, and one of the things that we participated in Nashville was the Black Lives Matter protest, which was one of the most moving events I've probably been in my entire life.
Yeah, I have to agree, and you know, I've taken you to a few different marches. I've taken you to the Women's March in San Francisco. We've been to the Pride March in New York. And I have to say all of those issues are important, but I feel like for us, particularly being a diverse couple, and in Nashville, in the middle of the South, that was really a march that I will forever be the most proud of attending, even with what was going on with coronavirus. It was quite controversial to go to a march in the middle of coronavirus, a pandemic. However, I felt like if we didn't feel as strongly about what the march represented, we wouldn't have gone. And I honestly don't have any regrets. I think it's very inspiring that so many people essentially risked their lives to support George Floyd.
Yeah, it was truly incredible where it was originally supposed to be 200 to 300 people. Ended up being 20 to 30,000 people that were lining the streets and marching together.
And I did not see that coming. I was genuinely shocked how many people were there and what a diverse crowd it was. I think your favorite memory was when we were marching up the hill and all those cars were honking.
Yeah, it was a truly incredible sight. The police had barricaded the roads, and there was about 20 or 30 cars that were honking their horns and screaming in support of Black Lives Matter. It was really awesome.
Yeah, and I think that they weren't random at all. I think they planned that out to park in the middle of a highway, which was actually kind of rebellious and cool.
Yeah, it was just another amazing portion of the entire protest.
I think my favorite part was just that we got to stand on the right side of such a significant part of history. Honestly, I can't wait to tell our kids about that.
I'm just hoping that by that time all this change has been
Hopefully. Well, what are the ways that we can support? Okay, what comes to my mind first is donating.
Yep, absolutely.
I think that we have donated to two organizations that are extremely personal to us, Amnesty International and Black Lives Matter. If you guys need any ideas or tips of where to donate, you can jump on our website, www.sheroradio.com.
Yep, you can. And another great way to support is just to call your local government. Get in contact with your local congressman or congresswoman. Send a letter, send an email, even a phone call. They all can make a really big impact.
Voting. Making sure you're registered and that you know who to vote for in your local city or state is huge.
It's massive. It's all about all of us getting the right people in office so that they can pass the correct legislation so that we can have actual change.
Amen. I think supporting Black-owned businesses and organizations is also key.
It's massive.
Again, if you don't know any that you would like to support, you can jump on our website at www.sheroradio.com.
Absolutely.
And lastly, but not least, actually, I think it's the most important way to support is educating yourself about Black history and racial struggles. Right. And it's okay to have these hard conversations with your friends of color, but just make sure they're comfortable with it, because people of color go through a lot of emotional labor talking about their own struggles, which are very personal. And also explaining what their ancestors went through is incredibly triggering. So just being careful there and, taking initiative to kind of look up everything on your own and really educate yourself. And it's time for our self-help tip of the day.
Journaling.
Journaling is something that I learned in therapy many years ago, and I honestly still do every day. And what I love about journaling is that you can kind of check in with yourself as your own best friend, to be self-aware and also reflect on any triggers before they turn into huge problems. And journaling doesn't have to just be used for the present time. It can also be used as a past record to see how far you've come.
Very true.
And that is the end of our very first episode of Shero Radio.
Yay!
Thank you so much for listening in, guys. We really appreciate it. And of course, if you want to subscribe to iTunes, you'll find us under Shero Radio. Or alternatively, you can jump on www.sheroradio.com to stream. Hope you have a great week.
Bye.